Sometimes life is built around a truth so solid, so unquestionable, that you never even think to doubt it. You build a home, raise a son, share each day with the woman you love, and it all feels strong, like an old oak tree with roots deep in the earth. But when the storm finally comes, you realize that tree was rotten inside all along. You just never noticed. I've always been a man of the land, born into farming, raised on sweat and sunburns, and built my life the way my father and his father before him did, one harvest at a time. My name's Charlie, and I own a good piece of land out here in Nebraska. It's not fancy, but it's mine. I built a life here with my wife, Laura. We'd been trying for a baby for years, but no luck. It was the only real shadow hanging over us. Still, we had each other. A solid home, a farm that kept us fed. Life was simple, predictable. And then I met Jack. It happened on my way back from a cattle auction 2 towns over. The old Chevy had been running fine all day, but just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the engine sputtered, coughed, and gave out right there on the side of a deserted highway. I slammed my palm against the wheel and swore under my breath. I wasn't the type to call for help unless I had no other choice. Popping the hood, I was elbow deep in grease when I heard footsteps crunch on gravel. Need a hand? I turned to see a young guy, mid-20s maybe, lean but wiry, with dark, tired eyes and a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He had that look, like someone who'd been running from something for a long time. "Depends," I said, eyeing him. "You know your way around a carburetor?" He gave a tired smirk. "Yeah, I'd say so." Jack, as he introduced himself, got under the hood and had my truck running again in 15 minutes. I learned he was drifting through town looking for work, no real place to stay. Said he'd been a mechanic, done some farm hand work, knew his way around machines. Maybe it was the way he didn't ask for anything, just nodded when I offered him a lift into town. Or maybe it was the way he looked, like a stray dog too proud to beg. Either way, something in me decided right then and there. "I could use a guy like you," I said. "Got a farm a few miles out. If you're looking for steady work, I got plenty." He hesitated, like he wasn't sure he should accept, but eventually he nodded. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Bringing a stranger onto my land wasn't something I did lightly, but Jack worked hard from day one. He wasn't just good with machines, he was a damn miracle worker. Fixed the combine that had been giving me hell for months, patched up the irrigation system, even helped with the livestock when needed. He worked fast, worked clean, never complained. Laura took a liking to him quick. She was always friendly, but with Jack, she was warm. She'd call him in for coffee when he worked late, send him home with extra food. She'd always been the nurturing type. Jack started joining us for dinner sometimes, sitting across from me at the table like he belonged there. He never said much about where he came from, but I didn't press. We all had our pasts, and hell, having him around made life easier. He even accompanied Laura on supply runs into town. It put me at ease knowing she wasn't out there alone, and besides, I trusted him. That trust only grew over the years. Jack became a part of our world. One evening, about 4 years later, we were sitting around the table after a long day in the fields. Laura was glowing, her hands resting on her stomach, eyes bright with something I couldn't quite place. "I have something to tell you," she said, glancing at Jack before looking back at me. I lifted a brow. "Yeah?" She exhaled, and then, with a smile so wide it nearly broke her face, she whispered, "I'm pregnant." I felt my whole world stop for a second. Pregnant. After all these years, after all the failed attempts, the heartbreak, the times we'd nearly given up, she was pregnant. I pulled her into my arms, laughing, unable to stop myself. "We're having a baby," I murmured against her hair, feeling the wet heat of her, tears against my shirt. Jack smiled too. "That's incredible news." I clapped him on the back, my heart so full it could have burst. We were family. He was like a younger brother to me, and now he'd be here to watch our child grow. Everything felt perfect. For now. When my son, Matt, was born, I knew no feeling on earth could match the moment I held him in my arms for the first time. He was tiny, wrinkled, and screaming like hell, but damn if he wasn't the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "This is our boy," I whispered to Laura, as she lay in the hospital bed, exhausted but smiling. "Our son," She nodded, eyes wet. We finally did it. I pressed a kiss to her forehead, then looked down at Matt again, promising myself that I'd teach him everything I knew. He'd grow up strong, learn the land, carry on the family name. Jack visited the hospital, bringing flowers, smiling as he held Matt for the first time. "You've got a good one here, Charlie," he said, voice thick with something I couldn't quite name. I laughed. "Yeah, he's gonna be just like his old man." Jack looked at the baby, his fingers tightening around the tiny hand that grasped his thumb. "Yeah," he murmured. "Just like his old man." Life settled into its rhythm after that. Matt grew fast, a bright, curious kid. I took him out to the fields with me as soon as he could walk, showing him how to feed the animals, how to dig, his hands into the dirt and feel the strength of the land. But something was different. Matt didn't light up when I showed him the fields. He wasn't interested in the farm. What he loved, what he always wanted to do, was follow Jack to the garage. At first, I brushed it off. He was just a kid. Kids liked new things, and Jack had machines and tools, stuff, that made noise and moved. But as the years passed, I started to feel it. That little twist in my gut when Matt looked at Jack with admiration, the way he talked about him, the way he mimicked his movements, the way he hung on to every word Jack said, I told myself it was nothing. Jack was family. Matt was just a kid who loved engines. That's all it was. That's all it had to be. Matt grew fast, faster than I ever expected. One day he was stumbling through the fields in oversized boots, gripping my finger like it was the only thing keeping him from falling. The next, he was running ahead of me, laughing, his face lit up with the kind of pure, unburdened joy only a child can have. I wanted to raise him right. To teach him the things my father had taught me, the land, the rhythm of the seasons, the patience it took to grow something from nothing. Farming was more than a job. It was a way of life. It was our way of life. But Matt had other ideas. Took him out to the fields every morning, had him help me feed the livestock, showed him how to tell if the soil was dry just by the way it crumbled between his fingers. But his heart was never in it. He'd do the work, sure, but the moment he got the chance, he'd wander off, and I always knew where to find him. In the garage. With Jack. One afternoon, I found him sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor, a greasy wrench in his hands, watching Jack work on an old generator. His eyes were bright, focused, filled with a kind of admiration I'd always hoped he'd have for me. Jack glanced up when I stepped inside. "Hey, Charlie," he said easily, wiping his hands on a rag. "Matt here's a natural." Matt grinned, holding up a small bolt. "Dad, did you know you can tell if a bearing's bad just by the way it spins?" "Jack showed me." I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms. "That's so?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, he's got a good feel for machines." I smiled, but something inside me twisted. "Well, that's good. Every man should know how to fix his own equipment." Matt beamed. "Jack says mechanics are the future. That soon everything on the farm is going to run on machines, and if I learn now, I'll be ahead of the game." I chuckled, but my jaw was tight. Maybe. But a man also needs to understand the land. You can't fix a drought with a wrench. Matt shrugged, clearly uninterested in the deeper meaning of my words. "I just like working with engines." I tried not to let it sting. At dinner that night, I brought it up to Laura. "He's spending too much time in that garage," I said, spearing a piece of steak with my fork. Laura arched a brow. "And that's a bad thing?" "He should be learning the farm, learning our work." She sighed, setting down her knife. "Charlie, maybe he's just not a farmer at heart. Maybe machines make him happy." I shook my head. "Farming is who we are, Laura. It's our legacy. He's our only child. Who else is going to take over when we're gone?" Laura reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Charlie, all I want is for him to be happy. Isn't that what you want too?" I nodded, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing something. Losing him. As the years passed, Matt's fascination only grew. He spent hours in the garage learning everything Jack had to teach him. Engines, hydraulics, electrical systems, things I never took much interest in, things that seemed to come naturally to him. Sometimes I'd watch them from a distance. Jack explaining something, Matt hanging on to every word, his face lighting up with excitement. And I'd wonder, why didn't he look at me like that? One evening, I decided to test the waters. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset bleed, red and orange across the sky. Matt was 16 now, lanky but strong, his hands already calloused from work. "You ever think about your future, son?" I asked, taking a sip of my beer. Matt leaned back, stretching his legs out in front of him. "Yeah, I think about it a lot." I smiled. "Good. The farm's gonna need a strong hand when I'm gone." Matt hesitated. "Dad, I don't know if I want to run the farm." My grip tightened around the bottle. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I love it here, I do. But fixing things, working on machines, that's what I'm passionate about. Jack says—" I cut him off. "Jack says a lot of things." Matt looked at me then, confused. "Why does that bother you?" I forced. A chuckle. "It doesn't. Just, you don't want to carry on the family business?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe. But not the way you do it. I want to innovate. I want to bring in new technology, make things run smoother. Jack's been teaching me about—" "Again, Jack." I swallowed down the frustration rising in my chest. "You're my son," I said, voice even. "This land is in your blood." Matt smiled softly. "Maybe. But I think there's more to life than just land." Later that night, Laura found me in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, staring at nothing. She placed a hand on my arm. "Charlie?" I sighed, rubbing my face. "He doesn't want to be a farmer, Laura." She gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe not in the way you expected, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you." I scoffed. "Then why does he listen to Jack? More than me?" Laura hesitated just a second too long. Then she shook her head. "Charlie, Jack's just a different kind of teacher. He's good with machines. That's what Matt connects with. It's not a competition. It sure as hell felt like one." But I didn't say that. I just nodded and kissed her goodnight, ignoring the pit in my stomach. Over the next year, I tried to let it go. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that Matt was just finding his own way, that I should be proud of the man he was becoming. But the truth was, every time I saw him in that garage, every time I saw him looking up to Jack with that same admiration I'd once seen in his mother's eyes, something deep inside me whispered that I was missing something I didn't want to see. Matt was never the sickly type. He was strong, full of life, always covered in grease or dirt, always moving, so when he started feeling tired all the time, I thought it was just growing pains. Maybe he was working too hard, maybe school was wearing him down. But then he started getting fevers, then the weight loss, then the coughing fits that shook his entire body. I took him to the local doctor expecting some simple diagnosis. A virus. Maybe anemia. Instead, we were sent straight to the city hospital. Laura gripped my hand so tight it hurt as we sat in the waiting room. Jack was there too, pacing the hallway like a caged animal. No one spoke. We were all too scared to say anything. Out loud, when the doctor finally came out, he looked grim. "It's serious," he said. "Matt's condition is deteriorating fast. His liver is failing. He needs a transplant." I swallowed hard, my mind struggling to process his words. What are his chances? Without a donor? The doctor sighed. "Not good," Laura covered, her mouth stifling a sob. I straightened my shoulders, forcing myself to stay calm. "We'll get tested. His family, his friends, whatever it takes." The doctor nodded. "That's the best thing you can do right now." Over the next few days, nearly everyone we knew got tested. Laura, me, Jack, friends, extended family. I kept myself busy making calls, arranging logistics, anything to keep my hands from shaking. Then, one afternoon, the doctor called us back in. Laura, Jack, and I sat in his office, the sterile scent of antiseptic thick in the air. The doctor shuffled some papers, looking between us with a measured expression. "We found a match," he said finally. Relief flooded through me, my body sagging under the weight of it. "Thank God," I exhaled. Then the doctor said a name. Not mine. Not a cousin. Not a friend. Jack. Jack was the match. I blinked, not understanding. "Wait." What? The doctor hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Jack is a perfect match. Biologically, that only happens with close blood relatives, specifically parents. The words didn't make sense. Not at first. Not until I turned to Laura. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't even crying anymore. She just sat there, silent, staring at the floor like a condemned prisoner awaiting a sentence. And then I turned to Jack, and he wasn't denying it either. A slow, sickening feeling unfurled in my gut, a void swallowing me from the inside. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry, my throat tight. Jack is Matt's father, no one answered. Because they didn't have to. The air felt thick, suffocating, pressing against my chest like a vice. I could hear the distant hum of the hospital machines, the faint murmur of voices outside the office. But in that moment, my world had shrunk to just the three of us. I turned to Laura, my voice low, strained. "How long have you known?" She swallowed hard. "Since the beginning." The words were a slap to the face. I felt like I'd been hit, like the wind had been knocked out of me. "Since the beginning?" I repeated, my voice hollow. Laura's eyes were wet, but she didn't try to deny it. "You never planned to tell me?" It wasn't a question. She shook her head slowly. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just a bitter, empty sound. "So all this time, our life, our family, it was all a lie?" Laura's face crumpled. "No, Charlie, it wasn't a lie. I love you. I always have." I turned to Jack then. "And you?" Jack looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. His hands clenched into fists on his lap, his jaw tight. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "I never meant for this to happen." I scoffed. "You never meant for it? You never meant to screw my wife? Never meant to raise my son right under my nose?" Jack flinched, but he didn't argue. I stared at him, the weight of everything crushing down on me. "You didn't just betray me," I said, my voice shaking with quiet rage. "You stole from me. You took everything, and I was too damn blind to see it." Jack opened his mouth, then closed it, shame darkening his features. Laura reached for me then, but I pulled back. Her touch felt like fire on my skin. "Charlie, please," she whispered. But there was nothing left to say. The surgery happened 2 days later. Jack saved Matt's life, and I wished I could say I was grateful. But the truth was, I couldn't even look at him. After it was done, after the doctors assured us that Matt would make a full recovery, I stood outside his hospital room staring through the glass. He was asleep, looking so small in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines that beeped in time with his breathing. He was alive. That was all that mattered, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong there, that he wasn't mine, that he never had been. That night, I sat alone in the dark, a glass of whiskey in my hand, my mind unraveling everything I thought I knew. Laura was in the other room, quiet, probably crying. Jack was down the hall, still recovering from the surgery, and me? I was a ghost. I had spent the last 17 years living in a house that wasn't mine, raising a son that wasn't mine, sleeping next to a woman who had chosen someone else. The weight of it was unbearable. But in that moment, one thing became clear. Jack had given Matt life. Now it was time for me to take mine back. Jack left the day Matt was discharged from the hospital. No goodbyes, no explanations. He just packed a bag and drove off. I watched from the porch as his truck disappeared down the road, leaving nothing but a trail of dust in its wake. Laura stood inside, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor like she expected him to. Turn around, but he didn't, and he never would. I didn't yell. I didn't throw accusations. I didn't need to. Laura already knew she'd lost me. We stayed under the same roof, but that was all we were now. Two strangers occupying the same space. Conversations were minimal, interactions purely functional. She'd ask if I needed something from the store. I'd tell her when the fence needed fixing. That was the extent of us. I wasn't cruel. I didn't lash out, but I didn't love her anymore, and she knew it. My focus shifted entirely to Matt. He was still my son, maybe not by blood, but in every other way that mattered. At first, things were awkward between us. He sensed the shift, the unspoken tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud. But I never let him see my pain. Instead, I threw myself into teaching him. Not about betrayal, not about loss, but about the land, about the roots that had held me up when everything else had crumbled. At first, he resisted. Matt still loved his machines. He still spent hours in the garage, tinkering with engines and circuits, talking about efficiency and automation. But I never forced the farm on him. I just showed him what I knew. I let him ride with me at dawn, feeling the weight of the morning air before the sun burned it away. I let him press his hands into the soil, teaching him to recognize the moisture, the texture, the scent of the earth after a fresh rain. Slowly, he started to understand. One evening, he stood beside me as we watched the sunset over the fields. "It's peaceful out here," he said. I nodded. "Always has been." He exhaled, hands in his pockets. "I get why you love it so much." I glanced at him. "You don't have to take it over, son." He hesitated. "I know, but I want to learn. Maybe I can find a way to bring in new tech without losing what makes it special." For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to hope. Years passed. Matt grew into a man, taller than me, with his mother's sharp eyes and my quiet nature. He graduated college with honors, a degree in agricultural engineering, combining both his love for machines and the land he'd grown up on. And when it was time for him to take the next step, I did something that surprised even myself. I sent him away, not out of punishment, not out of anger, but because he deserved more than this place. Jack had always talked about seeing the world, about traveling to places beyond this farm. So I sent Matt there instead. I gave him the dream that Jack never got to have. And I let him go. Laura never left. She stayed in that house, moving like a ghost through rooms that no longer felt like home. Didn't hate her. I didn't love her. I felt nothing for her at all, and that was worse than hatred. Because hatred fades, but nothingness, that stays forever. One evening, years later, I stood on the porch, watching the wind ripple through the fields. The sun was setting, casting the land in gold and amber, the same way it had every night of my life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light, no weight on my chest, no anger in my veins, just the quiet hum of the earth beneath my feet. I closed my eyes, inhaling deep, letting the air fill my lungs. This land was mine. This life was mine. I was free. Laura? She had built her own prison, and I felt no sorrow for her, not anymore.